Who am I? I am Brick City Brown Chick. Brick City, Newark, New Jersey, where I was born and raised. Brown Chick, because, well, obviously. I am a proud Black Gen X woman. I am smart, sarcastic, and honest. Sometimes too honest for my own good. I have been happy, grateful, and joyful. But I have also been sad, resentful, and depressed. I have cursed people out, with cause, mind you, and I have walked away from friendships that no longer served me, also with cause. I have been the good girl, the good friend, the good daughter, and the good wife. But I have also been the angry ex, the resentful friend, the withdrawn child, and the frustrated wife. I have a bachelor's and a master's degree, both of which I worked really hard for. I have numerous continuing education certifications. I have a job which provides me a good living, but minimal satisfaction. I have a home that I love, but sometimes wish I was wealthy enough to gut, enlarge, and just redo. I have a husband who deals with a lot, as do I, as all married people do. I have a dog and a cat who I wish would just stop being temperamental animals and get along already. It's only been 4 years. I have plans, dreams, and goals that have nothing to do with my current life. Because at the end of the day, I know the reality is that the only person who can make any changes to any and all of the above is me. Welcome to What I Know Now, a life lessons podcast for anyone going through it and still trying to figure it out. Don't make me feel that it's over. Time is like a clock in my heart. Touch me, touch. Was the heat too much? I thought I lost you from the start. Welcome back, everyone, to What I Know Now. And this is episode 25. I could have done without that year. The opening lyrics for this episode are from a song called Time by the Culture Club. Today, I'm going to be talking about what is to date the worst year of my life. And as the episode goes on, you'll understand why I've dubbed it that. This is about the year 2005. In 2005, I had been married close to 6 years. My mother-in-law had moved in with us. The three of us had an apartment together because she had to retire early from the federal government due to long-standing and ongoing health issues. She was not in a position to live on her own, either physically or financially. So my husband and I sat down and had a conversation about what was the best solution for his mom. And of course, this was a situation where everybody had advice. And most of the advice was do not live with your mother in law under any circumstances. Now, a couple of the people who gave that advice gave it as people who had been there, who had gone through this particular situation and said, this is not a good idea. I know you guys have been married for more than a minute, but you haven't really been married long enough to put yourself in the position of being caretakers or fill in the blank. And this is just not a good idea for your marriage. But at the end of the conversation, my husband and I decided that this was what we needed to do because my mother in law really did need emotional support more than anything. And we were the people in the position to do that. So the three of us moved in together, I think at the end of 2003, maybe, and it was fine. What my husband always said was, your responsibility, meaning him talking to me, your responsibility is to be the buffer. Your job is to make sure my mother, who I love dearly, doesn't drive me crazy. And his mom, to her credit, was very much in the mindset of, we all live here and we share a kitchen, but we each have our own rooms and our own space. And I'm really not here to interrupt or throw a wrench in your marriage. So thankfully, she was not, the mother in law from hell or the crazy person or the person who wanted to sort of come in and rearrange everything. That was not her personality whatsoever. At that time, I was between jobs, we'll say, in the nonprofit sector. And so a lot of my responsibility became keeping track of and taking her to and from her doctor's appointments. She could drive herself, but it was just better if somebody else did. She had a lot of doctors and a lot of appointments. So, what that meant is she and I spent a lot of time together. And I really did get to know her on a level that I never would have if we all hadn't lived together. So, for that, I am very grateful. In 2005, well, I guess starting in 2004 and going into 2005, I had been having my own health challenges. And my challenges were all physical. I was having numbness in my hands and my feet and, joint pain. And all of this was inexplicable. Nobody had any idea what it was. I went to doctor after doctor after doctor who all sort of shrugged their shoulders like, we don't know what this is. We get that it's bothering you and it's affecting your life. There's an understatement. But we don't know what it is. So therefore, we don't know what to do about it. So I was super irritated and frustrated and, trying to be the good wife and the good daughter-in-law and not feeling well and not just not in a good place mentally and not working. That was also stressful. So as 2005 wore on, my mother in law's health issues, which included she had a heart condition, she had lupus. Because she had lupus, she had moved to the point where she was now on dialysis 3 days a week. So there was just a whole lot going on with my issues, with her issues, and both of us trying to keep a lid on those issues. For my husband's sake, he was the one person who was working, keeping the household together from a monetary standpoint. So that was a lot of stress on him. So she and I both sort of consciously decided to kind of try to keep those under wraps. My mother in law's relationship with my husband, the two of them were always closely connected because she raised him by herself, him and his older brother, who none of us talk about. So she raised the two of them on her own when she and her husband divorced. But my brother-in-law was, we'll say, the prodigal son. He was the son that would always leave, would always go out into the world and do whatever, and then call or come back and expect his mother to fix the mess he made, which she did frequently. And so when you're in a situation of being the other child, which in this case would be my husband, it makes you feel very much like, okay, what the hell? Like, I'm the kid who's here. I'm the kid who's, doing for you and helping you out. And you're always reaching out for the kid who isn't here and most of the time doesn't give a crap. That goes on in lots of families, and it's something that usually does not get resolved from the kid's point of view. Thankfully for my husband, it did get resolved. My mother in law finally had, like, the come to Jesus moment and sat down with him and said, listen, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for making you feel like you didn't matter because I was always reaching out to help your brother or try to find him different ways of doing things. And I realized in that process, I didn't give you everything you needed. And I'm sorry for that. So they got to have that conversation and get it resolved. In addition to my mother in law, my husband was also very close to his maternal grandmother. She and his mother never lived more than probably 15 minutes apart. So his grandmother was always a big part of his life. When his mother was out working 2 and 3 jobs when he was very young, he would go and stay with his grandmother. So he had spent a lot of time with her and really got to know her. And so his mother and his grandmother were the most important people in his life. He did not associate with his father's side of the family at all. And the rest of his mother's family, he was not all that crazy about. So his mother and his grandmother were the two women who raised him and the two women he had come to depend on in his life. In May of 2005, actually the day after Mother's Day, I had gone back to work. I was working a new job and he was working. And he just had a feeling that you get, that you can never describe to people, that his mother was sick or was not doing well. And so he called her and got no answer. And it was not like her at all to not answer the phone. So, after a couple of times of calling her and not getting her on the phone, he decided he needed to leave work. He was working in DC, come back out to Laurel, which is where we were living in Maryland, and see what was going on. When he got home, what he found was his mother on the floor, and so she was breathing but she was not conscious. So he called 911. They took her to the hospital, and sort of the short version of a long story is she was in a diabetic coma, and she was in the hospital for several weeks. She got better, she got worse, she got better, she got worse. It was just a long time thing. So that was May, and now we move sort of to the end of June, beginning of July. His mother had been transferred to a rehabilitation facility, and one night somehow she stumbled out of bed and fell and hit her head. And so that was sort of the beginning of the end. It was the beginning of her decline. At some point, she went into not a diabetic coma, but I guess, for lack of a better word, a regular coma. And she was declared brain dead. And so the doctor said to my husband, okay, you have a choice. You can either turn the machines off and let her go, or you can decide to leave the machines on, but she could be like this for 20 years. Now, the important thing here is that my mother in law was 53 years old. So she was not an elderly woman. And even if she had been elderly, this still would have been a horrifying situation to be in. To be the child and be given that choice, that you have to make this choice for your mother. Now, the only thing I will say that was positive about the situation is, unlike a lot of kids who are put in this situation, my husband was lucky enough that he and his mother had had sort of these what if conversations. And she had always been very clear that if she was in a condition where she could not take care of herself, she could not breathe on her own, she could not speak on her own, she was not able to take care of herself, that she did not want to live that way. So there was no ambiguity about what she would have wanted. Did that make the situation easier? Absolutely not. It is I can only describe it as horrifying situation to be in, to have to make that decision. And so once he made it, the doctors have to ask, like, do you want to be here when we do this? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. No one would want to be there for that. The doctors told us that, even once they turn the machines off, she may still be alive for 2 or 3 hours. So it wasn't going to be like it is on TV where they shut machines off and she's gone. It could be hours. And so we made the decision we were not going to be there. And it did end up taking several hours before we got that phone call. So once you make that decision and the person is gone, then you've got a whole new set of decisions to make about funerals and about whether you want to have somebody cremated and all those things that people don't like to talk about that you have to deal with. So he made the decision to have her cremated. She had wanted to have her ashes scattered in the ocean, so that was clear. So we decided to wait several weeks before we had the service because people were going to be coming from different parts of the country, and we wanted to make sure that everybody who wanted to be there would have the chance to be there. So, about a week, maybe a little longer than that, after his mother died, my husband got a phone call from his uncle, from my mother in law's brother, who had been taking care of his grandmother. And he had called to let us know that his grandmother had died. And my husband had to turn around and tell him that his sister had died. Sorry about that. We are having technical difficulties today with our light sources. So I apologize if I suddenly look very dark, but here we are. We're going to keep moving. So, my husband's uncle told my husband that his grandmother had died, and my husband had to tell his uncle that his sister had died. So, within the space of about a week and a half, my husband lost the two women that had raised him, that had meant so much to him. And it was just a really awful, awful time. People ask me, how does your marriage get through something like that? Because nobody's ever prepared you're not prepared for your parents' death, and you're not prepared for your grandparents' death either. And you're really not prepared for those to happen in rapid succession. You're just not. And it took a lot of emotional strength to get through that time. My husband leaned very heavily on me, which I knew he would because that's who he is. And that's how marriage is supposed to work. You've got to support your spouse through some really awful decisions and times. And so that's how we got through that. That brings us kind of into August, I guess. And by August, I was feeling really bad. I mean, physically, emotionally, mentally, I was worn out, I was run down. And by that point, I was really frustrated and annoyed and wanted to know what the heck was the matter with me. So I finally found a doctor after being referred to several doctors. A doctor referred me to a neurosurgeon who looked at my CAT scans and my brain scans and all these tests I had done and informed me. Short version of a long story. If you want to hear the long version, please listen to episode 12, I believe it is, which is called Doctor Doctor, where I go into this in detail. But he essentially told me that I needed to have brain surgery to fix a problem I'd had since birth, and that if I didn't have the brain surgery, I would eventually, and by eventually, he meant 50. At that point, I was 35. I'd be in a wheelchair. And so my option was either to medicate and try to regulate the pain, do pain management for the rest of my life, knowing that I would end up being in a wheelchair, or I could have the brain surgery and fix the problem. Well, as I said to him, that's not really a choice. What you're saying to me is do this or your life will be radically altered. And he agreed with me. He said, yeah, that's what I'm telling you. But I can't tell you that. I can't say it that way. I'm the doctor. All I can do is advise you on what to do. So, over the next 3, 4 months, I had to see him several times. I had to have more scans so that they could be very precise when they cut the hole in my skull and went in to fix the problem. So, as we got closer and closer to the end of the year, the stress just ratcheted up because I now had this surgery to schedule. And even though, they give you odds and they tell you what could or could not happen, there is no way to really prepare yourself for someone's going to cut a hole in your skull. Like, it's the weirdest, strangest thing that's ever happened to me. It's not something I don't know anyone else that I've met in my entire life who's had brain surgery. Literally don't know anyone else. So it's not like having your appendix out. It's not a common thing where lots of people have done it and they're still here. They're the living proof of how it went. That's not what it is. It is literally something where you're like, I am the only person I know who's going to have to go through this, and I may not come out of it. I mean, that's the reality. Someone is going to cut into your skull and touch your brain. Frankly, in the beginning, I was like, that's super creepy. Like, this is like some Frankenstein crap. I was really not at all amused. But when you are given the be in a wheelchair or you could continue to have a regular life, that's what you have to deal with. The day of my surgery, which was 3 days before, no, 4 days before Christmas. So it was December 21st. I don't even know how we got to right before Christmas. I don't remember that part. I think I've blocked it out, but that's when it was. My surgery was supposed to happen at like 6 a.m. The doctor had an emergency case, so my surgery got pushed back to almost noon. It was supposed to take 5 hours. It took 9 hours. So by like 6 hours into it, my husband was losing his mind in the waiting area. My mother was with him because he had lost his mother and his grandmother less than 6 months ago. And now, this surgery that was supposed to take 5 hours, 4 or 5 hours, had now taken like close to seven. And he was getting no word about what was going on. So a nurse finally like went into the OR to get the story, came back and said, okay, the doctor said he found some scarring on your wife's brain. So that has slowed things down, but it's going well. She's fine. Don't worry. Easier said than done, right? Yeah. So after 9 hours, so now we're talking after 9 p.m., they finally finish the surgery. They get me into recovery. And my husband and I had made an agreement before I had this surgery that once I got in recovery and he was talking to me, if I was okay, like if I could hear him and understand him, because when you're in recovery, it's sort of twilight. You're not asleep, you're not out, but you're also not really entirely there. So it's a little tricky. We'd made this agreement that if I was okay, I would give him a thumbs up sign. And so they had a really hard time waking me up from anesthesia because, yeah, I wasn't supposed to be under for 9 hours. That was not the plan. So I was under much longer than anybody anticipated. And so it was very hard getting me out of that twilight place. And so he's talking to me, the nurse is talking to me, my mother's sort of at the end of the bed, like shaking my leg, and they're all trying to get me to wake up. And anybody who knows me knows that not only am I not a morning person, but it really doesn't matter what time I wake up. If somebody else wakes me up, I am a cranky B word. Let's say that. I just don't wake me up. It's just not pretty. So I've got basically three people and a bright light in my face trying to wake me up from brain surgery. And, the nurse is like, are you okay? Are you okay? And finally, I sort of got it together enough to say, I'd be perfectly fine if you people would just stop yelling at me. And my husband looked up at the nurse, and the nurse is she's got this horrified look on her face, and he's like, she's fine. She'll be fine. And my mother just shook her head, like, oh dear. So I spent exactly 72 hours in the hospital, 3 days, which is some sort of miracle. Day one was the surgery, and then I had to spend a couple more days there. And they make you go through physical therapy and occupational therapy. And the most annoying part is they want to play 20 questions. Literally, they wake you up every 3 hours and ask you the same set of questions because they're trying to make sure that all the neurons in your brain are firing correctly and you know who you are and where you are and what happened. So they would wake me up every 3 hours and ask me my name, ask me what month it was, ask me who the president was. It was just an annoying 48 hours from my perspective. But when the occupational health person and the physical therapist both signed off on me being released and they said, "We're going to spring you for Christmas," I was like, "You don't have to tell me twice. I'm out of here." So I was very glad to end those 72 hours in the hospital. Now, what was recovery like for me? Recovery was not nearly as bad as I thought it would be because the doctor, the surgeon, had prepared me for, he said, "You're going to feel like hell. You're going to feel like hell for probably 3 or 4 months. It's just the nature of the beast." It was one of those true miracle situations where I went into surgery in pain and I came out of surgery out of pain. I woke up and literally the pain I had been in for a year and a half was gone. It was just a complete miracle. That's not the kind of thing that happens in real life. It happens on TV. But in real life, when you go through major surgery, you wake up in major pain. And that is not what I had. Was my recovery routine in other ways? Yes. Can't lift anything over than 5 pounds, can't drive, can't leave your apartment, all those sorts of things. But I could cook for myself and do things like that so my husband could go back to work and not have to worry about me. So 2005 was a year I was extremely grateful to see go. I'm sure even more than I was glad to see it go, my husband was incredibly glad to see it go. He lost his mother and his grandmother, but thankfully he didn't lose his wife. He didn't lose me, which was a very real possibility. I mean, my outcome was good. I am soon to be 54. I am not in a wheelchair. That is not what played out. The surgery was successful, but it could have gone so many other different ways. So I am extremely grateful for the doctors and the care team. And my husband is extremely grateful that he didn't lose all three women in his life that year, just two, which is not a just situation, but that's the reality. What I know now that I didn't know when 2005 ended was how strong I was and am, and how good and supportive a wife I could be. One of the things about getting married that people don't really think about is you take those vows: better, worse, richer, poor, sickness, health. You understand those vows, at least most people do, but you don't understand the circumstances that will test them. You say sickness and health, but you don't know how that's going to play out. And so that was the reality of my vows being played out, making sure that I had the energy and the wherewithal to be the support that my husband needed when he needed me, when his mother and his grandmother died, so that he could turn around several months later and be the support I needed him to be, the calm, rational, logical person that he is when I was a complete emotional basket case about having brain surgery. What I also know now is that my reaction to having to have surgery was totally logical. Was totally, I can't imagine how anyone would react differently. You are just so stunned and taken aback when somebody says, they have to cut into your skull. It's just an insane thought. But you have to adjust to it quickly, and you have to accept what is. And so I got a lot better after 2005 at accepting what is, as opposed to what I wanted it to be or what I wished it was. So it was kind of a gut check, reality check kind of year that, like I said, I could have done without. But I know that I am a stronger person for having gone through it. I want to thank everybody for listening today, especially through technical glitches. Those happen. Welcome to modern life. I look forward to seeing everybody in next week's episode. Take care, and thanks a lot.